Good morning. Welcome to the Board of Adjustment for the Town of Estes Park, Tuesday, March 3rd, 9 a.m. To my right is Vice Chair Colin Godsey. To my left is our new member, Stephen Nielsen. Welcome, and we're glad to have you. And I am Chair Moreau. Our first item is to approve today's agenda. Could I get a motion, please?
I move to approve the agenda.
Could I get a second, please? Second. Can I get your vote, please? That passed unanimously. Next item is the consent agenda. The minutes from last meeting dated February 3rd, 2026. As member Nielsen wasn't here, do you have any comments or questions about the minutes from the last meeting?
I do not.
Good. I move that we approve the minutes from the last meeting. Can I get a second?
Second.
Can I get your vote? Oh, I didn't introduce the other ones of you. Excuse me. Director Karashia and Senior Planner Hornbeck and Recording Secretary Karen Swanman. Sorry about that. First item is, action item is wetland setback variance, 1754 Fish Hatchery Road. Planner Hornbeck will. See if anyone has any comments. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody in the audience have any comments unrelated to the agenda today? Unrelated? Yes, ma'am. Okay, hearing none.
Test, test, test. Oh. Hey.
You want to give them both of
Yeah.
them?
Yeah.
Did you turn them both on?
Just one. Yeah. Yeah. Test, test, test. Yeah.
Try it again.
The mic should work now.
Yeah, we'll have time to talk about that.
Good morning.
Morning.
I think we're all set here.
Good.
So this variance request is for this property, which is owned by the town of Estes Park and also by the National Park Service. The applicant is the Estes Park Housing Authority, and they are seeking to develop workforce housing on the northern portion of the site. Oh, yeah, I'll let you know. Thanks. The entire property is approximately 75 acres in size. The area north of the river, which is subject to the proposed development, is approximately 25 acres. The property was previously used as a fish hatchery from the early 1900s to the 1980s. Many of the current wetlands on the site appear to have been created as a result of ponds and related infrastructure with the fish hatchery. The Park Service owns a strip of land through the site, which was dedicated in the early 1900s, providing access to the park. Okay, next slide. The applicant has submitted a subdivision application, which depicts approximately 100 dwelling units and associated road and infrastructure improvements. Roads and associated earthwork and grading are proposed to occur within the 50-foot wetland setback required by the Development Code. The Development Code describes activities prohibited within the 50-foot setback. It states no person shall engage in any activity that will disturb, remove, fill, drain, dredge, clear, destroy, or alter any area, including vegetation within stream or river corridors, wetlands, and their associated buffer setback areas. Okay, next slide. So no disturbance is proposed within any wetland itself. However, the applicant requests a variance to allow activities which would disturb areas within the wetland setback / buffer. The map here and table indicates the proposed areas for encroachment into that 50-foot setback. Also requested is a 10% margin of error for any field changes or unforeseen changes which may occur. The requested setbacks from wetlands are approximately 9 feet in Area B, which is the westernmost portion. Area C is approximately 16 feet. Area H, approximately 26 feet, and Area I, approximately 23 feet. The Development Code provides review criteria for evaluating variance requests. The first criteria relates to special circumstances or conditions unique to the property and practical difficulty. The application materials indicate the site's historic use as a fish hatchery, included 20 or more ponds, and some but not all of these ponds were remediated after the fish hatchery closed. Areas that were not remediated remain on site and are now deemed wetlands per the Development Code definition. So there are numerous factors, including the historic use of the property, steep topography, prevalence of wetlands, and bifurcated ownership, which create special circumstances and conditions unique to this property. Next. The variance request for areas B and C is driven by the special circumstance of Park Service ownership of a parcel of land running through the site. The parcel is currently a dirt road and removes a significant portion of usable land from the site, as it cannot be built upon or transferred to the town without an act of Congress. The Park Service, however, will allow the land to be used as a roadway, so the applicant proposes shifting the current fish hatchery road into that Park Service strip of land. However, this realignment would require additional paving and widening, which would result in improvements in the 50-foot wetland setback. The variance request for areas H and I is largely necessary to access that eastern portion of the site. It makes up approximately 20% of the developable land on the parcel. This portion would be inaccessible and therefore unusable without either this variance or without major disturbance of cut and fill through steep slopes to access the site from the north. These requested variances will not have the effect of nullifying or impairing the intent and purposes of the wetland protection standards in the code. A letter from the applicant's wetland consultant describes best management practices the project is committed to following and states with these measures implemented, the wetlands would not be harmed. Next slide. Criteria 2, in determining practical difficulty, the BOA shall consider the following factors. A, whether there can be any beneficial use of the property without the variances. While there can be beneficial use of the property without the variances, certain portions of the site are largely unusable without the variances. B, whether the variance is substantial. Staff finding is the variances are not substantial, as the majority of the 50-foot wetland setbacks on the site are not encroached upon. C, whether the essential character of the neighborhood would be substantially altered, or whether adjoining properties would suffer substantial detriment as a result of the variance. Staff finding is the essential character would not be substantially altered, and adjoining properties would not suffer substantial detriment. Next slide. D, whether the variance would adversely affect delivery of public service. Staff does not find that to be the case here. E, whether the applicant purchased the property with knowledge of the requirement. The town appears to have assumed ownership of this property prior to adoption of these wetland setback requirements. F, whether the applicant's predicament can be mitigated through some other method. Staff finding is there's no viable alternative to accessing the eastern portion of the site or utilizing the Park Service land without the variances. Number 3 indicates no variance shall be granted when the conditions or circumstances are recurrent in nature, which is not the case here. Number 4, staff finds not applicable. Number 5 states if authorized, a variance to represent the least deviation from regulations that will afford relief. Staff finding is the design represents the least deviation in order to provide access to the eastern portion of the site and utilize Park Service land. Criteria 6 is not applicable, and criteria 7 allows the BOA to approve with conditions. Staff does recommend one condition, that the best management practices outlined in the application be adhered to. Next slide. Advantages and disadvantages. Requested variances meet the standards for review. Disadvantages, the activities within the wetland setbacks may increase the chance of encroachment into or negative impacts to wetlands themselves. However, best management practices can help mitigate this risk. Next. Staff recommends BOA approve the variance request subject to the condition mentioned, following the best management practices. Next. Public notice was provided in accordance with code requirements. We've received approximately 5 public comments in opposition, which are linked in the packet materials. Next slide. And sample motions are provided for your reference. That concludes my presentation. The applicant does have a presentation as well.
Okay. Does any members have any questions for staff? Yes, sir.
No questions for staff.
I have a couple questions. Can you show us where the existing fish hatchery road is versus where it'll be realigned?
I'm guessing the applicant probably has some slides that
Okay.
can show that better than I can.
Has there been any wildlife study or environmental impact study done?
There's been study by the applicant's environmental specialist on impacts to the wetlands, and they can speak in more detail about that.
How come we weren't given that information?
I guess that was an error on our part. If there's specific information you're looking for, we can
Okay.
provide
How
that.
about wildlife study?
I don't think there's anything specific just to wildlife.
Okay. All right. I think that's it. Does the applicant or applicant's representative want to give their presentation?
Okay.
Appreciate it. Good morning, Board. My name is Scott Moulton. I serve as the Executive Director of the Estes Park Housing Authority. So I get the distinct honor this morning of introducing the development team and kicking us off this morning. We're happy to be here today. Thank you very much for your time and effort in reviewing this. This represents the first step after a culmination of nearly 2 years worth of work. So we're happy to be here this morning to talk about it with you. Next slide, please. One back. Thank you. So again, I'm Scott Molding. I serve as the Executive Director of the Estes Park Housing Authority. Our development team consists of Peter Levine, who's the Director of Real Estate Development for the Housing Authority, Rob Goss, who is the Project Civil Engineer Lead on the team, Ronnie Pelucio, who is a land planner and architect with Polona Studio. And the property owners of this project are the Town of Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park. And we are partnering with both of those entities to bring more affordable and attainable housing options to the Estes Valley. We, of course, are the applicant on behalf of those two entities that own land that we're seeking to develop on. Today's request, of course, is a variance to wetland setbacks, which the team is going to go into detail about what that means and the reason why we're requesting those setbacks. And it's really in 2 key areas. To address Chair Moreau's questions briefly, we do have not only a wildlife study done by our wetlands specialist, but also the wetlands study done by the same specialist. So we do have that material. Happy to provide anything you might need. Okay, so I'll turn it over now. I believe it's going to Ronnie Pelucio, who will take a deep dive into the setback request.
Good morning. Just let me orient to the slides here. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the project. Again, my name's Ronnie Palisio. I'm a land planner and architect. We've been working on this neighborhood plan with many consultants, including ecologists and the national park, as well as other parties regarding traffic and other aspects that might impact development in your community. Obviously, we're here today to talk about the importance of the wetlands and specifically the setbacks. And I just would like to start at kind of that highest level. The image that you see here includes language taken from the EPA's website. It's pretty obvious to most of us, but wetlands are important features in the landscape. They provide numerous beneficial services for people and animal life. Some of those functions include improving water quality and habitat, as well as storing floodwaters and maintaining surface water. Those are valuable functions. We're here to share with you that our proposal does not impact, as evaluated by our specialists, those specific wetlands on our site. And so the setback is one of the mechanisms in order to protect the wetlands. And so clearly this subjective review, which has criteria associated with the potential impact, includes evaluation from a specialist that helps us today, present to you with confidence that the proposal with specific mitigation strategies would not impact the wetlands on the property. And just at the highest level, clearly the definitions of wetlands and the value of them come from the federal and state level. As you likely know, your town uses the setbacks that are defined by Larimer County as a base for regulating and evaluating, these types of proximities. And then part of your criteria is about, this subjective evaluation. So we're hopeful that today we can share with you our thinking as a team that includes multiple specialists that have come to this conclusion. Next slide, please. I'm going to speak a little bit about the existing conditions and then with our civil engineer go into greater detail. But this map shows the land areas in blue as the areas that have been delineated by our wetland specialists that are on the property. They went through a process of going to the site, looking at the plant ecology and water that is present, and gave us the base map that then helped impact the design of the project. And so we designed around what you see here today. I'll talk a little bit on future slides about what historically happened on the site, what our proposal is, and then how the national parkland has impacted some of our design decisions. But I'll invite Rob Goss up to speak briefly about this slide.
Thank you, Ronnie, and good morning, all. So where Ronnie left off, we had the wetlands delineated by the wetlands specialist. Our team took over to field survey all of the flagging throughout the site, and that's where this line work comes from here with all the WET lines. So that's actual field survey shots from the flagging on site. Our goal all along in developing this site, in addition to the wetlands, has been to maintain the character of the site, to reduce our impacts, and to minimize the changes to the site, keep the natural landscape as much as possible. A few areas here that we can look at. We have an existing sanitary sewer. You can see in that larger north pond, it's the most significant pond on this site. It doesn't hold any water. It holds just kind of some marshland during the springtime runoff, but it doesn't actually hold water these days. There's a culvert under the, if you see the Fall River center line, I don't have a cursor here, but you can see where the Fall River center line is labeled towards the right. Oh, perfect, thank you. So, perfect. So right here is an existing two-track road that crosses that kind of bottleneck point in between these defined wetlands. That pond on the north was one of the main fish hatchery ponds, and this section here is an outlet from an existing culvert right there. So that's the nature of that kind of bottleneck that exists there. There's an existing two-track that leads to the eastern portion of the site. Our plan is to improve that existing connection, including pavement. Right now it's just a primitive two-track road. So paving to connect and access that eastern portion to include additional units on the east side. In addition, so as I was saying, that sewer, there's a sewer that actually runs through the wetlands right now that may have been in place before these wetlands were created. That's very old sanitary sewer piping. Our intention there is to abandon that section in place that runs through the wetlands and realign that under the two-track road to avoid any future disturbance of that area. Throughout the site, we've been minimizing building footprints, and that allows us to minimize the mass grading that's needed and the overall disturbance to the land. That also reduces the size of retaining walls. Right now, we're proposing relatively small retaining walls given the topography that we're dealing with here. The greatest retaining wall maxes out at 12 feet, and that is along this existing ridge line. So that's really the reason why it hits that 12 feet. Everything else is closer to the 4 to 8 foot section. And that's accomplished by the site design and the terracing of the smaller footprints as we're working with the land instead of trying to place larger footprint, larger density buildings on this site. So keeping everything to single family duplexes and small townhome strips. There's generally 4 unit townhomes. There's one that's at 5 units, but that's the general intent, to minimize the building footprints in order to minimize disturbances. Along the river, again, minimizing disturbance, we have water quality ponds proposed along the river corridor. Those will clean the water and discharge through a combination of grass and rock-lined swales, so keeping it as natural as possible in that discharge into the river. And also limiting public access, limiting improvements along the river. There's very limited opportunities for the public to interact with that river, not much more than there currently exists today. So we're keeping everything fairly isolated from that river corridor, where a lot of the wetlands, especially where all the natural wetlands occur. I think that's all for this slide.
You can actually leave the slide up. I'm going to speak on this
Yeah,
for just one more second.
course.
Thanks, Rob.
Yep.
And I just wanted to kind of orient everybody again to the slide and just share what you're seeing. And Chair Moreau, I think this is one of a couple of slides that talk about existing conditions, existing fish hatchery road, and then the proposed realignment of that road on the National Park Service land. We have some overlays that'll make it more explicit, but I do think it's worth noting here, and I apologize, but I think maybe turning around is the best. So the existing fish hatchery road that we're all familiar with crosses the bridge, and I might note that everything that is east of the bridge, the fish hatchery road will remain in its existing condition, which sits on the National Park Service land, and it'll be realigned to follow the dirt and gravel road that exists in place, because that more or less falls exactly in the 60-foot swath of land that is the national park land. And so that realignment does a handful of things for us. I'll share more about that in a moment. But other things that you see on this image that are valuable are about the asphalt and hardscape that exist on the site today and existing structures. In addition to that, you've heard Rob talk about compacted earth. So while not denoted in this image, there are areas of land, including that land area that the National Park owns, and then the area that kind of goes between the ponds on the east side that are, compacted earth today. I think it's important and of interest to just say something that Rob was touching on. In the northeastern side of the site where these two larger wetlands are, there is a structure that sits between here and here that's a head gate. And what it does is it limits the water flow from this pond into this area, which is a slough. This slough brought fish down into the river, and the river follows this edge here. The blue line you're seeing is actually not the river, it's the northern boundary that is the wetland edge. And so the river itself is actually wider than the area that is denoted in blue, and you'll see that in future images. Next slide, please. Okay, so you've heard a little bit about the existing conditions. This image overlays our proposal onto existing conditions. And you can see there are no buildings that are touching the wetlands. And so really, again, we're here to talk about the setbacks. The property has a really deep and interesting history to it. And we've tried to, I don't expect anybody to read through all of this, but starting in 1902, there were discussions about having a fish hatchery on the property. And then throughout the duration of the early 1900s all the way up to 1983, that fish hatchery was prolific and it was very meaningful to this community as well as the state. The images in the upper right-hand corner, I think, of our particular interest. That image was taken from 1969. So in most of our lifetimes, not too long ago, it looked like that. It was riddled and chicken-poxed with these ponds across the site. And as you've heard from our planner staff, those ponds have been filled in over time. I'm not trying to devalue what we have there today. The wetlands are important. The fact that they're man-made is of interest, but the wetlands that exist today still have value, and we believe in what we're doing that is a form of protecting them. But it is of interest to note that the natural ecosystem that is of the wetlands today is something that's man-made and of recent time. And so we thought we'd share this with you. I think this more clearly also highlights where the river is and then where other edges of regulatory agencies and setbacks occur, including 100-year and 500-year floodplains. We have, through iterative design process, moved all of our buildings out of the 500-year, 100 and less restrictive 500-year floodplain in an effort for life safety as well as ecological purposes. You can see on the right-hand side where our road now crosses where the head gate is. And I think it might be of interest to people that we're using naming conventions of the street that help reference some of the historical aspects of the site, including that road, which is named Headgate Road. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is our illustrative site plan. I think there's value in just describing what we're doing kind of in totality on the property, recognizing that your purview today is about wetlands, but I know that a lot of people are interested in the purposefulness of a development on this site. As you know, the current project proposes 109 residential units. Those residential units all happen on the north side of our realigned fish hatchery road. And Chair Moreau, I'll show more about where that is in a minute, and actually forthcoming slides that'll make more sense. But the coloring convention on this slide is meant to be a sort of a heat map that describes building types. The more close to red the color is, the more dense the product is. That's to say, the reddest stuff in the middle of the property are compact 4-unit buildings. They're small. And then the lighter the buildings go, the smaller they are. So the yellow buildings are single-family homes. One of the concepts for this neighborhood is to make sure that we have relationships with the surrounding properties and adjacencies that have a contextual approach in which Less dense product is close to less dense product. So our neighbors to the east are primarily single-family homes, and the homes that we have up against that adjacency intend to respect that through their building product and type. The overall concept of the neighborhood is to provide affordable housing, but to do it in a meaningful way that respects the topography as well as does some significant things for placemaking. So this neighborhood is about people. Homes have front porches, they face onto common streets, right-of-ways, areas with public sidewalks or green spaces. And I'm just going to point to the image behind you again here with my cursor. You can see that some of the buildings have frontages that face green courts. There's one there, there's one there, there's one there, and there's one here. Those green courts are important and they're oriented to follow the topography so that there is a natural drainage pattern that passes through the site, and it occurs in a way that is compatible with topography. Buildings step with the hillside, and so the cut and fill exercise that comes typically with sites that have large buildings is helped to be mitigated by having small buildings. And so the impact on the overall ecosystem of the site and topography is minimized through the land plan and the selection of these building products. Once again, we've tried to fit the site plan hand in glove with the many constraints of the property, and with a purposeful direction to make it a community for people to have, relationships with their neighbors and to follow all of the practices about placemaking that are good that come with creating a community of this scale. And let's go to the next slide. So you saw on the previous slide there were 109 units. We thought it was valuable to just share a little bit of our responsiveness about the evolution of this site plan over time, and specifically how our thought process about the national park land and then public feedback in relation to adjacencies to waterways helped influence a change. So this image that you see here is a previous proposal. It is not dissimilar in concept, but it's important to note, and I'll point to the screen behind you again, that in the upper right-hand corner of this site, at one point we had an I-shaped road that circumnavigated the wetlands. And at this point, you'll notice in the next, we're not going to flip to it yet, but the next slide, we've eliminated some of that road. Another thing we're pointing out is, Chairperson Moreau, we had the Fish Hatchery Road in its existing condition in this plan. And you'll see that we had development on what I would just describe as the southwest side of our Fish Hatchery Road. And you can see the proximity of these buildings in relation to the water was different at one point. In addition, we were proposing 120 units, so the number of units have decreased. Based on the findings that the National Park Service land ran through our property, as well as hearing from the public about areas of the property that they have found most interesting in terms of access to water, preservation or conservation of land adjacent to water, we made some modifications. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see in this image, we've overlaid the National Park Service land on the first draft proposal, and it runs right through our buildings. And you'll notice that the area to the south of them is still developable land, and that technically you could run this road through the proposal as it was demonstrated here and still build in that land area. Let's go to the next slide. But part of the response was to help to create essentially a buffer through the purposing of that national park swath of land, which the intention of that land that was given to the national park was for right-of-way purposes. And so using it to drive vehicles on in this formal way is consistent with the thought process of that donation. But using it as kind of an edge condition for development has also helped with the conservation efforts on the southern side of the property. And then in this image, you also see in the northeast corner that we've eliminated the road that circumnavigated the detention. And let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is really the image that describes where the areas of the project get closer to the wetlands. We've organized them kind of as areas B and C to the west and areas H and I to the north, because we think that the purposefulness of the idea behind the reasoning is kind of these two different topics. And you've heard planning staff talk about them. One of them, the one that we just were speaking about, is National Park Service land that's on the western side. And the other one on the north side has a handful of variables that led us to this solution. I'll talk about the National Park Service land. It's a little more obvious. And that is to just point out, there are existing pathways that vehicles drive on today that's compacted earth in this very area. It is an area of land that had an intent that we think matches what our purpose is today, which is basically a drivable surface. In addition to that drivable surface, it includes the multi-use path that has minor realignments to allow it to fit in its entirety along and in a meaningful way along Fish Hatchery Road. And you can see that those edge conditions come up against the near wetlands, but it is really primarily earthwork associated with the modifications to make sure that the pathways and the roads are working properly. And just again, it is important to note that our ecologist evaluated this along with the National Park Service to come to these conclusions. So this is a collaborative process that influenced the design. It wasn't just a proposal that was then evaluated. We went through iterative processes to come to this conclusion with experts in the room and then also that have provided additional material. So that is areas B and C, and I'm sure you'll hear more about this. Pete will speak to these topics more specifically later, but I'm just also going to talk conceptually about areas H and I. Areas H and I mostly have today the area that we think of the fish hatchery because there are a series of smaller structures as well as parking areas, vast areas of asphalt for navigation, and then there's also a significant amount of compacted earth. And just to point out, that compacted earth crosses the head gate that exists today and that will remain in place. That is exactly where the cursor is. Thank you for pointing that. It's also worth noting that that green thing there includes one aspect of restoration that comes along with this. So in addition to the removal of the need through abandonment of services that go directly underneath that wetland, that would potentially, if to continue to stay in place, would require servicing that may damage the wetland in the future. That realignment takes it out, and there's existing hardscape and manholes that we intend to remove and restore that area that is shown in green. That road we had spoken about multiple times with the Public Works Department as well as the Fire Department, because we understand the need to service the community with emergency vehicles, and in particular times of like dire need in which, let's just say, fire hazard situations in which there needs to be evacuation. Initially, that road that you see in the area H and I was narrower, and we had it narrow enough that a fire truck could pass, but we were encouraged by the Public Works Department to increase it to meet a typical 20-foot dimension so that multiple vehicles could pass at once. And while the fire department felt that they could access the site on the east with a narrower road, which consequently would have less impact in relationship to the wetlands, we were directed to make it larger for these potentially hazardous situations that may come. It's also worth noting that at the eastern end of the cul-de-sac, and this might require some pointing, at the eastern end of the cul-de-sac, there is a stub alley. That alley accesses garages, and at the very edge of that property, what we intend to do is have a gated but operable access for residents of this neighborhood and residents to the east, so that during times of evacuation, there's additional permeability through this neighborhood so that people can evacuate in meaningful manner. So it's beneficial to both existing neighbors to the east and this community. And in deep conversation with the fire department, the fire marshal thinks that this is a great idea. And so part of the purposefulness of developing to the east is to also create greater permeability for life safety. If you could go to the next slide. Okay, I just want to kind of come back to the base premise here, which is that we really relied on our consultants. And this collaborative effort resulted in the statement that you see here, as well as the land plan that we believe does great things for placemaking, future residents, affordable housing, meeting ecology desires and needs. We, as you heard, evaluated the migratory patterns, the reproductive patterns, as well as the use of the site during winter and summer conditions. So we have a deep body of information that impacted this. For your review today, clearly we're looking at a setback, but the totality and purposefulness of this, I think, is valuable for you just to hear. And I just want to point out that our specialists, along with others, have come to the conclusion that the variance request to have a proximity to the wetland that is governed by the town's relationship with the county says your subjective review allows us to have an opinion on this. And our ecologist says this would have no direct impact on the wetlands themselves. I'll pass it over to, well, actually, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, I'll pass it over to Pete. He's gonna go into a more detailed and like fine-grained version of looking at areas B and C and H and I. This is going to be a really point-by-point approach to it. And so, you know, we're hoping that this helps clarify any of the criteria pieces, but we wanted to give you the larger picture as well. So thank you. I'll hand over the mic.
Thank you.
Thank you for that overview, Ronnie. In addition to that, I'm going to talk a little bit as well about.
Excuse me, could you state your name?
My name is Peter Levine. I'm the Director of Real Estate Development for the Housing Authority.
All right, thank you.
So the request for, as we've discussed, is a variance to the development code to allow activities described herein within the wetland setback per the tables that we're showing. As I get into this as well, we'll talk a little bit more about the purpose and also some numbers that are associated with it, because I think that's an important part to be able to ground the conversation as well. So as we noted, areas B and C are associated with the national parkland. Areas H and I are associated with access to the eastern portion of the property. Areas B and C require some earthwork at the bridge in order to bend the road along the strip of land owned by the national park. It's also interesting that's consistent with the south side of the river, where the existing fish hatchery road is also built on that national park land. And areas H and I requires earthwork and paving along that existing berm that's currently used for utility access and other items, which is evidenced by the tire tracks. Next slide, please. So the purpose of request for B and C is to allow that construction of Fish Hatchery Road in the 60-foot wide parcel that's owned by the National Park Service. As Scott noted, the applications on this variance are Rocky Mountain National Park and the town of Estes Park. They're the owners of the property, and we have representatives of both here today, and there's agreements in place for this road. The Housing Authority and the National Park Service have entered into a conditional agreement to construct the road in this location, and the town of Estes Park and the National Park Service have entered into a conditional agreement to maintain the road if and when it is able to be constructed. So looking at the, sorry, next slide. Looking at the purpose question of why do we need to build a road on the national park land? The answer to that is really better utilization of the land to allow for low impact massing and building types. I think it's important to note as we get into the variance requirements, the presence of this road and the awareness of it. It was donated by F.O. Stanley 100 years ago, way back in 1920s, to the national park. The town had lost record of this ownership for a number of years, and that's evidenced by the construction of Fall River Trail on this land that is on the national park. Had the town been aware that the national park owned this land, there would have been a separate permitting process and also separate studies, a class 3, like the archaeological, cultural, and environmental study, which is something that we had to do as part of this project as well, based on federal requirements of developing on national land. When we were first involved with it, we had some awareness of it from a previous developer who had started. It was not in the area that was accurate. We initially thought it was along where the current Fall River Road is. We found later through a conversation with the national park, meeting with their surveyor and our civil engineer, that the previous person had the bearing off incorrectly. And so that was another reason the first draft changed from the second draft, and the utilization of that national park land changed significantly. So if we're looking at, are there other solutions to utilize this land? The parcel cannot be transferred to the town of Estes Park without an action from Congress at the federal level. No private property can be platted or constructed on the national park land. And moving the Fish Hatchery Road to the south allows for practical utilization of the site. That will allow for low massing, workforce, and attainable housing to be built. It also allows for conservation of land near Fall River, and it further outlines the goals in the code and the comprehensive plan, which are supportive of workforce housing. Next slide, please. So the purpose of request for H&I, that's that access to the eastern portion. As Planner Hornbeck noted, this is to allow access to the eastern portion of the site. Approximately 21% of developable land in the parcel is in this area, and we have 15 units planned for this location, which is about 14% of the total units. This will also allow for restoration, the removal of that existing asphalt parking lot that Ronnie had referenced. We would not be able to remove that without a variance, even though it would be restoring from a natural standpoint, and also to help facilitate evacuation and emergency service access. As Ronnie noted, it provides that additional emergency egress route to existing neighbors to the east, as well as future residents on the site. Next slide, please. So for the decision criteria, first one is whether or not special circumstances or conditions exist. I think the 60-foot wide strip of federal land that bisects the site certainly counts as a special circumstance, particularly because that knowledge from the town standpoint had been lost for a number of decades. The site was previously used as a fish hatchery with many man-made ponds, if we demonstrated as well. And while many of these ponds were filled in and remediated, not all of them were. I think that creates a unique circumstance or condition that is not common in most other sites across the valley. So from a practical difficulty standpoint, what I really want to do here is key in on item C. So whether or not the essential character of the neighborhood would be substantially altered, or whether adjoining properties would suffer a substantial detriment as a result of the variance. And the reason that I really want to key in on this part is because I and the development team firmly believes that by allowing this variance, it would create a project that better matches the character of the adjacent neighborhood. And we'll get into what it looks like depending on the outcome. Next slide, please. So if we look at the illustrative site plan again, we know and we understand that we're developing in a special site near the national park and Fall River. The town is interested in developing this site for workforce housing, and we at the Housing Authority thought that, and still believe, that we can do a better job at developing this site to suit the needs of the workforce as well as the neighbors and the overall community than an outside private developer could do. And a couple slides later, we'll take a look at what one of those site plans were for a private developer who was trying to do workforce housing at a significantly higher rental rate than what we're trying to do as well. So as we're taking this, is we took the desires of the town, the constraints that are associated with the proximity of the national park, the waterways, and the special environmental and natural concerns that this site deserves to have taken into consideration. So we took all that, as well as the community needs for the workforce housing, feedback for the neighbors, and we've developed a plan that has small building types, which is often known colloquially as missing middle housing. So it includes a number of single family, duplexes, triplex, a fourplex, and just a single fiveplex, which is also only 2 stories tall. In order to develop this type of housing, one needs land to be able to separate out the units from one another. If there's a lack of land to be able to create smaller building types, that typically is going to result in combining units to create larger and taller buildings. So next slide, please. So if we just look at the project details, the project goals from the town of Estes Park is they've identified and they wanted to develop this site for workforce housing for about 20 years now. It first came up in the 1996 comprehensive plan, and actually when it was first developed back in the 1920s, the superintendent for the fish hatchery lived on the site. So ever since it had first been developed, it has always been used for workforce housing, and even now it's currently used for workforce housing with some of the existing buildings. For the Housing Authority, our goal on the site is to provide quality workforce housing for the workers of the Estes community with rents and sales prices that best serve the community members while creating missing middle architectural designs to limit the impacts and footprints in this unique location. So that being said, as with any development, there are unavoidable costs that are associated with it, and this one is no exception. So just some of the costs that are associated with even just really putting a shovel in the ground and building a handful of units requires the improvement of the Eastern Fish Hatchery and Fall Road intersections. This is actually already above the threshold of improvement. So even without this project, technically that intersection does not pass the threshold, which is less than 10 left-hand turns in the peak hour. We have a water booster pump station to install to make sure that there's going to be adequate water pressure for domestic and fire flow use. We have road and utility infrastructure for the subdivision. Also want to point out, we've never talked and are not pursuing a metro district, which is something that developers in Colorado are known to do for larger subdivisions. And we also have utility extensions that run across Fall River to the property as well. Next slide, please. So if we just look at the impact of the wetland decisions, the potential outcome, if we have the variances improved, the project can proceed largely as envisioned, trying to capture that missing middle housing types. If variance is not approved, we're going to lose the lots on both the eastern portion and the southwestern portion of the site. That means we have less lots that are available to spread the costs of the various improvements. So costs need to be made up somewhere. We're not going to increase rents and sales prices, which is the common thing to do from a developer, because that defeats the entire mission and the point of the workforce housing and what we're trying to build here. So in order to keep the costs kind of roughly the same or make it up somewhere, we have to keep the unit count roughly the same. And so if we lose developable land where we can't spread out to missing middle housing type, the only way to consolidate that is to really create larger buildings and taller buildings. I think, I don't know a great way to get around that, candidly. If we're not able to create those cost savings by creating additional lots, it has to be saved in the buildings themselves. You look at a fourplex, that's going to be cheaper to build on a per unit basis than a single family. A 16plex is going to be cheaper to build on a per unit basis than a fourplex. And so the outcome is likely to be a new plan with larger buildings as well as taller buildings if we're not able to develop on the areas of the site that we are currently targeting. The other thing that I just want to bring up is a conversation that I had with CHAFA. That's the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. This is the organization that scores the various projects and determines who receives the low-income housing tax credits for development, which is what we're going to be pursuing, and that's the biggest tool available to be able to develop this site. Last year, less than 50% of the 9% low-income housing tax credits were approved, so it's a very competitive process. I met with them, CHAFA, a few months ago to review our plan. Their main feedback to me was more density. Combine the buildings, make them larger. That's the goal of the state. That's what they want to see. We at the Housing Authority, we don't want to do that. We want to develop a project that we think is better for the neighbors, the community as a whole, and still is able to serve that workforce demographic that we're trying to serve. However, if the variance is denied, the site's going to have more density with larger buildings, which I believe will ultimately create a less desirable project. However, it potentially creates a project that better aligns with the goals of the state and potentially makes funding more straightforward. So the denial of the variance, I don't see how it's going to stop the workforce housing development from taking place, but it's likely going to create a project that I think is more objectionable to the neighbors and will likely have less benefit to the community as a whole. And so for context, one more slide, please. This is an example of the previous developer who the town had engaged to develop the site. This was their 2022 plan. They had planned for 190 units. There's 12 buildings on site here, so if you take 190 divided by 12, that comes out to about 16 units per building average. Again, ours is 5 units as the largest building that we're planning. We're also planning to target lower rents and sales price than this plan had as well. Ultimately, if we lose that land, some of these buildings, particularly on the center of the site where we have those walk-up fourplexes, I think they're going to have to be combined. I don't see a easy way, I don't see a tangible way to get around it. And so for comparison, again, this is, one more slide, please. This is what we have come up with, which has much lower, smaller building footprints, lower impact. I think it better aligns with the site here as it's nestled in this special area. Less concrete and asphalt than it would be with larger buildings and big pavements. I think that previous design understated the amount of asphalt and roads that would be required to surface park all of those units. Next slide, please. And so just wrapping up here again, bringing back to the wetland conversation and the purpose, you know, town staff, they wanted to make sure that we had clear direction and clear conclusion from a third-party consultant that no direct impact to the waters of the United States, including wetlands, open waters, and riparian corridor, will be realized with this wetland setback variance request. And so the goal of the request is to create the missing middle housing, lower, smaller building footprint and massing, and also create a balance where we are not we're not tearing up the site too much. We're trying to strike the balance of environmental considerations, wildlife considerations, and naturally real estate development does not go hand in hand with that. And so trying to strike the balance and thread the needle is what we have strived to do at the Housing Authority. And with this plan, you know, we believe that we have accomplished that.
Thank you.
That's the end of the presentation.
Wow, that was a lot. Does anybody on the board have any questions for that last presentation?
In regards to the best management practices that you intend to use to mitigate any deterioration of wetlands, any previous experience with using these, results of issues with using them? Did they work? Did they not? What do you plan on doing here to make sure that they're followed?
We're planning to utilize the best practices that are in the wetland report from the third-party wetland specialist. Most of those best practices have to do with the construction, so ensuring that when we engage a general contractor, that those best practices are contractually agreed to and make sure that they're followed throughout the construction phases.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that there's kind of two bodies of best practices. I think it's worthy of noting that we've hired a consultant that also looks specifically at fire mitigation. They have a best management best practices body of work that talks about how to be prepared in a sense of hardness for potential fire. And then we also have best practices management specific to the time of construction in relation and what we're doing in relationship to wetlands, as Pete was describing. And so those practices are common. And they require supervision during construction, and it's really about managing and limiting what is happening in the specific areas that are adjacent to these critical conditions. In this case, it does encompass the land areas that are adjacent to wetlands, as well as other preservation and conservation desires on site that go beyond your review, that relate to critical ecosystems and preservation of specific trees that we as a team are trying to do in companion to the wetlands area.
Any questions?
I did have one question, well, two questions actually. There was a wildlife study done. What were the results of that?
It was, I think, a 30-plus page document with a number of results, so I don't want to misspeak by trying to summarize it in a quick 20, 30 seconds. I'm happy to send it to you. It was mainly in, I think, our takeaway. there's wildlife that's out there on the site. A lot of the wildlife report looks directly at endangered or critical species that are endangered, or I forget what the next level below that is, concerned species. So they did not find presence of endangered or species that fit that threshold that would require additional level of conservation or not developing the site at all. But I'm happy to provide that report to you as well.
And then one last question, are there any concerns with runoff from vehicles or anything in the neighborhood getting into Fall River?
About that, Rob. Well, our civil engineer speak towards that.
Yes, that is handled through the water quality control ponds. So all runoff from the developed site will be routed into water quality ponds where they will meet the minimum amount of treatment before any release into the river corridor. So yes, everything travels through the process, and the intent is to only release clean water back into the river.
Great, thank you.
I have questions for you. Hang on. Can the realignment be part in the national park land and part in the town land? In other words, realign it a little further north?
I'm not sure on the
Fish hatchery
specifics.
specifically.
You're right. I'm not sure on the specifics. I know the intent is to realign it wholly on the Park Service land to utilize its intent in that location that was originally mapped. Anything other would need to be explored further, I would say.
Okay. Was there any thoughts of taking an additional bridge out of the development to mitigate disturbing the setback areas of wetlands at the cul-de-sac?
Are you referring to the kind of that bridge in between the bottleneck point where the...
Correct. What is that? On Headgate Road above, north of the slough. So was there any thoughts about doing a bridge further south from the units to cross over the wetlands and then connect to existing Fish Hatchery Road?
There was generally, the intent was to utilize the existing corridor through there to minimize creating any additional disturbances.
Okay.
And there's also floodplains that are involved to the southern area if we were to look at connecting.
The topography there is pretty significant. So a bridge would have much more significant impact if we were looking to span the slough than what we're doing today, which, as we've said, is utilizing an existing roadway and just expanding the width of it and formalizing it with hard surface.
Okay. Is there any grade change to the area above the slough to create the road?
There's basically a widening of it. And so there's grade change in the sense, I don't know if we could go back to the slide that just shows the kind of impact to the setback. Yeah, and keep going to the slide that has the colors of the impact. But essentially it's a widening, and so there is some grade change, and we will be limiting the amount of impact and width to the grading that happens at the edge through formalizing those edges with retaining walls. And whenever possible, we're using natural retaining material like boulders so that it's compatible with kind of the character of what's happening with that ecosystem. And so this image, I think, showcases that. You can see the brown stuff on the north side is kind of really the direction that it's headed. It's a little confusing because there today is an area that's wide enough to pass. And so while we're showing the whole width of that as kind of being touched, a lot of that is just because we're putting asphalt on it. So we've denoted that asphalt is there. The topo change to the north probably is within 6 to 8 feet of what exists today, including the retaining wall that happens outboard.
Okay. All right.
Chairperson, may I speak to one of the vice chair's questions? In terms of the wildlife report, if we could just go back to the illustrated site plan. The area on the property today that has the greatest amount of vegetation that is adjacent to the waterway is in fact that area that we have preserved. That's kind of the triangulated area in this zone. And, you know, specifically here, I think, is an important place to point out. And, you know, the purposefulness of that conservation effort that happened with this, like, current land plan was intentional. Again, it was responsive to the community's kind of experience with the site, as well as their noting of animal behavior, and then also documentation through our wildlife report. And then, Vice Chair, you were also asking something, I think, about, you know, another aspect I'll just say is the migratory patterns. And so there's obviously a clear area along the river that we're staying back from, which is very different than most of the town. I mean, just go to the east of this and homes are right on it. And while that doesn't prevent elk from walking through the neighborhoods, it does prevent other animals from passing. We did intentionally leave the land area that has the slough and the pond as a north to south corridor that's kind of part of the property. And then, you know, more bold animals might pass through the green courts that are also these finger-like projections for any migratory patterns that may happen off of the hillside and that have a desire to get through this specific neighborhood to Fall River. I mean, clearly the alternative is the national park is just off of this page where the orange boundary is. That's the to the left of the image.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No? So, looks like there is need for people in the audience to make comments. So, it's going to be limited to 3 minutes with your comment, and you're just going to raise your hand. I'm going to pick you. Please state your name and your address.
Hi, my name is Karen Sherman. I'm at 1597 Fish Hatchery Road. First of all, this is a beautiful development. It really is. It's and it sounds amazing. And anywhere in town, it would be incredible. But I've been on the river my entire life, almost 70 years. So 1982, went through that flood, and both bridges were wiped out, okay? My mom couldn't get out. It was pretty harrowing. Had a truck dropped on my land. That truck sits to this day. I'm going to leave that for you. So we have a truck sitting on my land from that flood. And it took almost 20 years for that section of land on the river to grow back. So floods are pretty darn destructive. 2013 flood, that one happened. This is where it used to be solid trees, and that took out all that. And I went down yesterday, and today, 13 years later, we're first getting, my first little trees are coming back. That's after 13 years. And people throw things on the river. They build bridges, they build walk walls, they trespass, they don't know that we own to the middle of the river. My neighbors are VRBOs, and they're constantly rearranging the river because they don't think it goes the right direction. So we're constantly having to either get in the river, they, like I said, build bridges, This is what people who live on the river, especially children, do. And that is a real fact. I have reiterated before, it took me 3.5 hours to evacuate with my son during the fires. And there is only one road out of that town, out of that section of the town. Harmony has 70, 80 employees, 50 to 60 clients. 200 plus create an additional strain on the river, on our evacuation needs. Exiting and entering, as they've talked about, Fish Hatchery Road is tricky at best. This land was given to us by the Stanleys, who built a power plant. They built a fish hatchery, which I had great honor to be able to enjoy as a child. They didn't put their hotel there. Rocky Mountain National Park is attempting to get dark skies certified. Dark skies are not enough, excuse me, but dark sky lights are not enough to protect that. And if you ever have been a stargazer, as I am, when you sit next to, when I look at stars across the street from Harmony, I don't see the skies. But if I get down the road by, the national park, I can see the stars. 70% of our animals migrate at night, and this development would disrupt that day and night animal life. Given the distance from town, I question using our tax dollars for workforce housing over 4 miles out of town rather than focusing on refurbishing existing buildings here in town. I work for someone, we have a lot of workforce. They only have one vehicle. They talk about maybe putting a nursery. I don't want my baby that far out of town and not be able to take care of them. So I'm just giving you, and I will leave with you, these pictures and a reality of living on the river, a reality of having the honor of living next to Rocky Mountain National Park. And I implore you to remember how the Stanleys and everybody else took that into consideration. And I think this development in town would be amazing. We do need it, but we also could refurbish what we have with my part of the tax dollars. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Hal Henderson. I live 2770 Epsilon Circle. I want to show you gentlemen a picture here. This is 2:30 in the afternoon when the last fire evacuation was. And these people had notice to get out. And like she said, it took 3 hours to get out. Now my question is, that presentation was wonderful. It looks like a combination of Beverly Hills and Disneyland. Mm-hmm. When they let all those people out, and all these people are trying to get out, nobody's going to get out. Now, I was talking to Janet Mershon, the senator, and she said that she spoke with Scott here, and he said they amended the polygon evacuation routes. Now, there's one way in and one way out. I want to know what that is. How do you amend the polygon evac? What is that? Scott? What is that?
I can address that later.
Can't do it now, huh?
Continue with your comment and I'll certainly address it.
This is a problem for people's safety. If you watch the news and you saw about the fires in California, see all those cars sitting on the side of the road lined up because the people couldn't get out and they're all burning. Looks just like that, you know? And I think about the floods in Texas. Little known that the government offered them $10 million years before to improve their evacuation route. They improved a wilderness trail and gave all their city officials bonuses, and people died. This is going to come back and haunt us. The campground was at Aspen Glen, is just on the other side of the road. And I can't imagine summertime, teenagers out there having a few cold ones, not paying attention to their fire. And that's with no notice. This is with notice. You know, you do need workforce housing, but I just had a thought. You put how many, 240 people up there? Where are they gonna work? What are they gonna do for a living? You know, they're not gonna be retirees, I imagine. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. Anybody else?
Good morning. I'm Eric Blackhurst, Chairman of the Estes Park Housing Authority. I would like you to approve what your staff has recommended and to take into consideration the in-depth work that's been done by the Housing Authority, the town of Estes Park, and its consultants for providing the opportunity for our workforce and our low to moderate income residents that support our community to have a place to live and to reside in rental units and also units that are for sale and provide an opportunity for home ownership. I thank you for your consideration, and I thank my staff and the people that have been hired by the Housing Authority to thoroughly analyze this particular site and to come and deal with wetlands that have been made by the town of Estes Park. And I think it's now time to allow for this project to move forward. It's a much finer project than what the town had considered just a few years ago. That would increase density by almost 100%. So I thank you for your consideration, and please abide by your staff's recommendations. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Anybody else? Terry?
My name is Terry Rizzuti. I live at 1523 Fish Hatchery Road. I drive that road almost every day. It's how I come into town, even though it's faster for me to go the other, go downstream. I go upstream because it's so much more beautiful up there, and I see all kinds of wildlife, and you never know what you're going to see on any given day. Most of my life I've been accused of being too direct and too simple. Today I'll try to honor both. I don't have a whole big problem with the H&I setbacks. It's the A and B setbacks. I feel like this housing authority or whoever the developer is, I feel like they either made a mistake, and we should have done this a year ago, or they did this on purpose. And if they made a mistake, then how many more mistakes are they going to make? And if they did this on purpose, what gave them the notion that that was okay? What gave them, unless you all are in on this, and this development's going to happen no matter what we say or anybody else says. A and B give me a problem because from everything I've read, that's where the daycare center is supposed to go. And I'm opposed to a daycare center out there. I think it's stupid to put a daycare center out there. And if I'm correct, that's where the daycare center is going. Why didn't you guys say something about it in your presentation? You totally ignored that. They called it workforce housing on that southwest side, but they got that big red thing on their map, That's where the daycare center is going. So if there's no daycare center, do they need that setback? Do they need to move the road? Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody else in the back?
Hello, I'm Christine Poppett, 650 Devon Drive. I submitted 2 public comments. I hope that you read them. One of my public comments stated, a redesign to avoid disturbing wetlands is the best option, the best management practices to avoid setting a precedent of approving any disturbance of or to wetlands. Once you change the landscape, you can never go back. A request for a variance involves a hardship. The only hardship that I see here is self-imposed by the number of units. As we've all just heard, the number of units have already been adjusted many times over the years. Perhaps they should be revisited again and not, and I'm sorry, the end of the presentation from Mr. Levine, I almost took offense to the fact that if you don't approve this variance today, the neighbors are probably not going to like it. It's going to go taller. To me, that was a threat. I took it the same way I took when Mr. Mabry, the owner of Elkhorn Lodge, threatened if he didn't get his annexation and establishment of zoning to A1, they were just going to walk away. I didn't care for that tone. In all the meetings that I've attended over the years for the fish hatchery project, and I believe I only missed one, I've never heard that this project is strictly attainable housing. Yet, one of the 2 applications, as there are 2 on the website, lists proposed land use, attainable housing for the workforce in the Estes Valley. That application is not signed by Town Administrator Mahalik. The second application lists proposed land use a month later, not to the date, but close, of just attainable workforce housing. I know there are questions about definitions of attainable, workforce, affordable, but attainable workforce housing to me is a nondescript word. It's an incorrect application, in my opinion. Which is it, attainable or workforce? And is it the Estes Valley or is it the town? The Estes Park Housing Authority pulled a rezoning application for this particular project after 179 Stanley Circle Drive was denied due to ordinance 1125, formerly known as ballot question 300. Was there an attempt to collect, and I don't expect an answer, was there an attempt to collect the required 2/3 signatures, or is this variance request a workaround to avoid ordinance 1125? I'm happy to hear today the reference to the CPW letters, which I've seen since October, so I'm not sure why they weren't shared with you. Wetlands aside, those letters always need to be addressed. They addressed a lot of wildlife issues, including moose, and I sincerely hope that these are not ignored. I thank you for listening and for making the right decision to deny this request. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, hearing none, are there
Just
any?
wanna hear Mr. Moulton. Do you have something to say to the gentleman?
If you would like me to, certainly.
Sure, could you come up, please?
Yeah, I can address a few items. So in terms of evacuation, which I think is a very important conversation, but it is outside the scope of this hearing specifically today, but I'm more than happy to address it at any point in time. So I want to go back a little bit. February of 2025, we're in 26, right? Yeah, so February of 25, we held a public meeting that included the National Park Service, the Fire District Chief, interim chief at the time, and at the time intern Police Chief Stewart as well. The sole purpose of that meeting was to allow not only the neighborhood or the neighbors to this potential project, but the larger community as a whole to hear lessons learned from our evacuations in 2020, to discuss that Fall River Village corridor specifically, and what we learned and what those who are responsible for our safety in extreme times have implemented in terms of changes to help with evacuations. In my conversations with Police Chief Stewart, in a lead up and even the conceptual idea of this development, but also because it was necessary, my understanding at least, in the chief's mind, it was necessary to make changes to the polygons that are used that allow our emergency crews to make evacuation decisions. And that specific corridor had large polygons, again, as I understand it. So the fire district and the police chief collaborated on their evacuation plans along with Rocky Mountain National Park to shrink those polygons up. That would allow them and all requisite emergency responders to be more responsive to conditions on the ground, whatever those may be, and would allow them to tier evacuations if and when those were necessary. And the idea would be to evacuate earlier smaller segments to get those folks out of harm's way, and then sort of tier those down the valley so that you don't end up with some of the bottlenecking that we saw in 2020. We recorded that meeting. Regretfully, we had some technical difficulties. So about the first 18 minutes of that public meeting are not, they're recorded, but the audio isn't available. The full transcript is available. Those are on our website. And the remaining hour-ish of that presentation is still on our website. You can hear the rest of the presentation of from those parties that I already mentioned. So that's the evacuation piece. If I could address a couple more quick things. The rezoning application that Ms. Poppets brought up, we did in fact withdraw a rezoning application. And the necessity for that, not the withdrawal, but the actual rezoning application was to avoid complications primarily in split lot zoning, which we're not even entirely sure. And if I misspeak, with the experts behind me or staff can correct me here. When the original, I'm going to back up a little bit. When the original parcel was rezoned, I believe in 2022, we followed, the town followed a floodplain boundary. With our iterative process of establishing lot lines and where we would build, we were never going to build inside of any of those floodplain boundaries, but the lots would have gone into a portion of the parcel that was not actually rezoned to RM. And that created complications in the approval, which aspect of the development code would then override, which one would we follow? Would that be the previous A1 or the existing RM? So our secondary rezone application was meant to clean up those lines and avoid some of those complications, really just along the river's edge. And then while we were at it, if we were going to go through the extreme level of work that is necessary to go through that process, we were going to rezone back portions of the land that didn't need to be RM. And that was in an attempt to sort of honor and display that we were not intending to build multifamily housing in the areas that we were going to rezone back to their original zoning. So we pulled that application really just to simplify the process, not to avoid anything. The setback hearing that we're here today to talk about has no impact on that decision whatsoever. And as a result of pulling that application to avoid complications, we made another adjustment to those lot lines, moving them, a few of them, I think it was 3, a little bit further north, and it caused us to have to combine buildings. So it got rid of some of the single-family product that we were hoping to be able to provide, but we just couldn't do it because of that rezone complication. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to public comment. And I think that Scott has addressed most of them, but I do want to just run through a handful of topics here. Forgive me, I don't know Karen's last name, but Sherman? Karen Sherman, I think did a great job articulating a handful of her concerns, and I just wanted to address them. I think we have a very similar desire. I think the perspective on how to address many of the topics that came up, just as a different way of perceiving, what the right route is. And so one of the topics is about the FEMA floodplain. And you heard Scott talk about this, but there is an adopted map today that is different than the latest body of FEMA information that's out there that has not been adopted. So those lines are different from one another. Mm-hmm. We are honoring both of them. And that is not just the 100-year floodplain, but the 500-year floodplain. So whatever is the most severe version of land area to be distant from, whether it be the wetland, the adopted map, or the current data, we're trying to honor it. And floods are hard to predict, but we're using the best of our information that's available to us today to make sure that this project is outside of all of the former and current boundaries. So we're doing our best. In terms of the river, there is some debris in the river. we intend to make some improvements that help remove some of the trash where possible. And so that may not affect the car, but that there is an ecosystem there that does need some attention. As you heard Scott talk about our meetings with the community, as well as having the fire, police, and national park present, we have analyzed emergency evacuation options. And as Scott said, preparedness is the key. And this isn't my idea. This is the fire department said this. And then also the scale of evacuation and making sure that it's a tiered approach in smaller quantities and doing it early is the best. We hired a wildland urban interface consultant that has helped us not only to help with the site design, but is also helping us with the buildings design. That is to make sure that the buildings are protected as much as possible. And I could go into great detail, but I won't bore you. But we have manuals on this, and we will follow them. I think it's also worth noting that the additional evacuation that we've described at the east that would come from the cul-de-sac, there are also evacuation strategies that are prepared for on the west, which are negotiation with neighbors that allow for access up existing roads that get to the back side of the facilities with the large parking lot that are associated with the National Park Service. And so there will be another option for emergency situations to egress out the west that don't require kind of the button hook road that currently has a challenge to it. And then we've also been speaking with the National Park about the proximity to the campgrounds and are working on plans to make sure that we're mitigating any potential evacuation needs from both directions in those areas. We have reached out to dark sky advocacy groups, and we're working on limiting the amount of lighting on the property. It is our desire to do the same. In fact, we don't want any street lights. And so I think Karen in particular would be pleased to know we're actually pushing back against other requests from the town to have street lights in the neighborhood. And instead of that, what we're doing is in our current proposal, we're suggesting pedestrian level lighting only at the key locations that the town has concern about crossings of the major road. And so our current application demonstrates that, and we have dark sky advocates that are helping support that. And so I think we have that common goal, and I'm hopeful that we can work to have that, be a low light, dark sky compliant neighborhood. I'm sure we will to whatever degree it is. I wanted to make sure Hal Henderson had some questions about who the workforce housing is for. Where are these people that need this? The data in your community, these are people that are current residents, like people that are current employees in your community need housing. This isn't about an influx of people that don't work in your community. It's not, in my understanding, for the retirees. This is for the working class that are the service-related people that help your community stay alive, that allow you to go out and get dinner or go to any of the local commercial places that are in your downtown. Terry Rizzuti has been at many of our meetings, and he, I think, speaks very clearly about his concerns, so I appreciate when he does articulate these. I do want to let you know, we're not holding any information back. We didn't know about the National Park Service land. We wouldn't have gone through all of that effort to create the previous plan. That when we found out, we responded. We have been transparent all along about our knowledge. Does it look like a mishap? It does. You've heard from the Housing Authority when they heard about it, why it happened, like lost information. It's complicated. This property has gone through significant change. And as I understand it, there are fragments of land that the National Park owns across your community, not just this, and that they would love for it to be mopped up, but the congressional piece to that makes it challenging. We, when found it, responded and shared that with your community. So there's no suspicious activity happening here about us not sharing our knowledge. In terms of the daycare center, I apologize for not having spoken about it. The daycare center is at the southwest corner of the property, and I think that this may be of particular interest because I think Terry's question about areas A and B do relate to that area. The daycare center did not and does not impact the location of Fish Hatchery Road. So this isn't like a puzzle that made that happen. There's plenty of room over there for a daycare center to be. By the way, a daycare center is an allowed use by right in an A1 zone district, not in the RM zone district. It's actually a different type of review, a special review in the RM. And so I just want to say, like, your more permissive zoning, which is A1, would allow for a daycare center on this property regardless. But that is just a fact. In terms of the land area, I hope to impress upon you that the potential desire to move Fish Hatchery Road further to the north and off of what currently is in the 60-foot swath of land that is the National Park Service land would create significant complexity. The topography between current Fish Hatchery Road and the stub road, that more or less is the existing Fish Hatchery Road that creates that triangulated developable parcel, has significant topography on it. So much so that we can't have an alley that connects from side to side without it doing a jog. And so pushing those roads closer together changes the building product, and it makes it harder to have developable property. In addition, the management and maintenance agreements associated with keeping the improvements of a road entirely on the National Park Service land are much cleaner to document and to regulate for your community as well as the national park, as opposed to straddling a property line that is partly owned by the federal government and your community. So I would strongly discourage, if there's contemplation from your board, to push that as part of a condition to push that road in a direction. I would strongly discourage it. I think it creates immense complexity, not only for the site plan, but for the management and maintenance agreements that are being worked on to make this possible. And then I think Scott spoke to Christine Poppett's question about the rezoning. And I think he did a great job at it. If you were to have looked at that rezoning application, I think that the community would have been surprised to know that if A1 is considered a down zone from RM, there was more land being down zoned in that application as a part of what we were trying to do. And as Scott said, it was an effort to not only clean up some of the area that was denoted as RM on the east side of the property that related to a boundary that has changed over time that relates to the floodplain, but it was going to be an effort to demonstrate goodwill that the conservation efforts associated with removing an area of land from RM and putting it back into A1 was a form of commitment about not proposing future development without another type of rezoning in that land area. And so there wasn't anything complicated other than an added additional process, which we understand your community is still trying to figure out how to navigate that process. And so we thought it's smart to avoid opening up the doors to do that, as this is already a complicated project which has many opinions. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Sandy Sherman. I live at 1597 Fish Hatchery Road. I want to address a couple of things and then ask a question. Terry bringing up the whole child care facility, and also Scott's reference to a controlled evacuation where people will wait their turn, I think is totally naive. In a fire situation or a flood situation, no one's going to sit there and say, oh yeah, you go first, I'll wait and maybe I won't make it back. I won't make it out of here. But with regard to the child care facility, if there are children there and everyone's evacuating from this narrow corridor, there are going to be parents who are going to want to go against the flow, like salmon do to spawn. They want to get back and get their children. How are they going to do that when all the traffic is going that way? Okay, so I think it's not well conceived that be there. Did you folks receive a letter from Cynthia Baltimore? It was sent to you, to the Housing Authority, and to the National Park. And the intention was that it would be entered into public record. If not, I'll be happy to read it. It may take a couple of minutes, but I think it's important to hear another resident who could not be here today.
Can I interrupt you for a moment? Did we receive anything from her? Okay, then we did.
Okay, but I think the people here also need to hear it. Should it be read?
If that's what you'd like to do with your
Yeah.
time.
Okay, I would. Thank you. We respectfully submit this letter in opposition to the requested variance to reduce the required 50-foot wetlands setback associated with the proposed 109-unit development on Fish Hatchery Road. We respect that these comments be entered into the official public record for this meeting today. We understand that the Board of Adjustment must evaluate variance requests under the standards set forth in the Estes Park Development Code, including Section 7.6, which exists to protect water quality, wildlife habitat, and biodiversity. Based on approval criteria required under this code, we believe that this variance fails to meet the multiple required findings. One, lack of undue hardship. A variance may only be granted where strict application of the code results in an undue hardship unique to the property. In this case, the hardship appears to arise from the density and site design chosen for the project, not for the extraordinary physical constraints of the land itself. The wetland setback is a known and established requirement. Adjustments to building placement, density, clustering, or orientation could allow development while respecting the 50-foot setback. If a smaller footprint, reduced density, or alternative configuration would allow compliance, then no undue hardship exists under this code. Two, self-imposed hardship. The development code does not permit a variance where the hardship is self-imposed. Here, the need for a setback encroachment is driven by the decision to pursue a specific unit count and configuration. The difficulty is not inherent in the land itself, but rather in the scale and the layout of the proposed project. A development plan that requires variance relief to function suggests the hardship is self-created. Three, substantial impairment of the intent of Section 7.6. Section 7.6 exists to protect wetlands, reproductive corridors, water quality, wildlife habitat, and biodiversity. The area functions as a documented elk calving area, a wildlife corridor for moose, deer, bear, and other species, a reproductive buffer supporting ecological function, a floodplain adjacent area contributing to drainage and flood mitigation. Reducing the required setback from 50 feet to approximately 39.8 feet nullifies the intent of the protected buffer established by the code. The setback is not arbitrary. It exists to provide meaningful ecological protection and long-term resilience. Granting this variance would materially impair the purpose of Section 7.6. 4, negative public impact and safety concerns. A variance must not be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare. This development is located in an area with documented wildfire evacuation challenges. During prior wildfire events, residents experienced significant delays evacuating Fish Hatchery Road. Adding 109 additional uses increases evacuation load, emergency access congestion, risk, and town of Estes Park liability exposure. The Estes Park Housing Authority has also acknowledged marginal water pressure at higher elevations requiring installation of a booster pump system. This indicates the infrastructure is already strained. Increasing density while reducing environmental buffers creates a measurable public safety concern and fails the approved criteria requiring protection of public welfare. 5, environmental degradation risks. Wetland setbacks exist to prevent stream bank erosion, degradation of fish and wildlife habitat, interface with natural drainage patterns, and cumulative recreation impact. While the Estes Park Housing Authority references best management practices, there's been no formal wildlife impact plan presented with structured Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Rocky Mountain National Park, and/or the Army of Corps of Engineers collaboration on the record. Without a documented wildlife mitigation plan and hydrological impact analysis, the board cannot reasonably conclude that encroachment will not result in long-term environmental degradation. We respectfully encourage the town to evaluate alternative approaches to meeting affordable housing needs that are fiscally responsible, environmentally sustainable, and do not introduce concentrated infrastructure or public safety risks. A distributed housing strategy leveraging the existing inventory throughout the town of Estes Park may provide a more balanced solution. For example, current market listings indicate approximately 35 homes priced under $550,000 could potentially be evaluated for workforce housing use or acquisition programs. Dispersing affordable housing throughout the community reduces environmental impact in sensitive area, avoids overburdening single access corridors, and strengthens neighborhood integration while mitigating evacuation and infrastructure concerns. Requests to the board. Given the failure to meet the requirements required under the Estes Park Development Code, we respectfully request the board, 1, deny the requested wetland setback variance. 2, require a formal wildlife impact and mitigation plan with documented CPW input before any reconsideration. 3, require a comprehensive evacuation and wildlife safety analysis addressing the current and future capacity to address the town of Estes Park's liability and risk due to the inappropriate location and the size of this project. 4, uphold the 50-foot setback requirement consistent with the intent of section 7.6. 5, the town consider alternative housing solutions that are fiscally responsible, environmentally sustainable, and do not increase public safety exposure in an area with documented evacuation constraints. We recognize the importance of housing solutions in Estes Park. However, environmental protection, public safety, and adherence to established code standards must remain paramount. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. That was a mouthful.
Yes, it was. And also, just as a thought, the town owns the land. The town is looking to develop the land, rezoned it, and now changing that. Is this incestual in any way? It's a question.
Yep.
But
Thank
I
you.
think safety and evacuation are a paramount concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Bankin. I live at 1523 Fish Hatchery Road. First of all, I would like to compliment the team because really you've done a fabulous job addressing a lot of the issues that I had concerns about when I came this morning. But I still have just a couple things I want to mention. First of all, we've all acknowledged the fact that wetlands are an extremely important part of our overall environmental existence here in the Estes Valley. There have been a few comments about how these particular wetlands are really kind of human-made wetlands because they were derived as part of the fish hatchery. Well, I've got two kind of responses, with the implication that somehow because they're human-made rather than natural, they maybe aren't quite as critical. two responses to that. Number one, our wildlife and our environmental surroundings have had 50 years to adjust to those wetlands being there. And so they are still very much, regardless of the source of the wetlands, they are very much critical to the overall environmental health of the area. Secondly, we've talked about the 50-foot setbacks that we have around our wetlands. Well, in many places throughout the country, including Larimer County records, they require a 100-foot setback from wetlands instead of a 50-foot setback. So our 50-foot setback is really sort of more restrictive or less protective of our wetlands than the approaches that are taken in a lot of places around the country. And one final point that I just have to throw in, because there have been a lot of comments about the elk and the deer and the moose that hang out in this area, but we keep forgetting to mention the fact that bighorn sheep also have this as part of their range that they are utilizing. And so bighorn sheep per se are very rare throughout the Estes Valley, but this is one area where they can find a home where they're comfortable. So it's another reason to consider very carefully how we are approaching this area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Is there any discussion?
I would just like an opportunity to respond.
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought the last time that had wrapped up, so sorry for jumping in earlier. I know typical process would have us stepping up at the very end, so I believe that this is it. So just to address Sandy Chairman's comments, who I think has also been tracking along with us and continues to have great feedback. I think one key thing that he was saying, not from the written response, was just about the controlled evacuation. And again, this isn't our, your other community members, your fire department is managing this process. And it is my understanding that the notification system associated with these smaller areas, polygons make it sound like we're in geometry class, but it's like just the land area that they've identified. That's a population of people that have certain egress routes, will be smaller, and they'll be notified earlier so that the phasing of evacuation allows for mitigating the very thing that Sandy was describing, which is like the overtoppling of people and kind of in an emergency situation trying to get away. So it'll happen earlier and incrementally, and that's what your community members have shared with us. And then just to Mary Bankin's, description about the wetlands, we're in agreement. We're not trying to diminish the value of the wetlands. And hopefully you heard when I said that earlier, but these wetlands were man-made, but that is not an attempt to diminish what they do today as a valuable ecosystem. In addition to what we've described, there's some bigger picture things that wetlands do in providing as a carbon sink, which helps to fight climate change. And so there are many good reasons for keeping the wetlands in addition to the habitat that it creates. And so we understand that, and I do not want to diminish it. Now, just to bring this back to our topic today, this is a question about setbacks. And so we are not building in the wetlands. We are not, based on our third-party consultant who has made a career of this, impacting the wetlands negatively. And this design is a long process that we've gone through with many professionals in their area of expertise, including the National Park Service, your community for their short-term, long-term vision, FEMA regulations associated with where boundaries may be, your Public Works Department, and all sorts of advocates for specialty topics. And we've relied on them for their professional review. And as we're saying to you today, we are not building in the wetlands, so we shouldn't talk about that. But what we are doing is building within an area that is a subjective review that's a distance to a wetland. And the concept is, are you impacting the wetland or not? That's the purpose of the setback. And as you've heard from us and our consultants, we are not negatively impacting the wetlands. And through these proactive measures, we'll mitigate anything that may happen during the process of construction as well. So thank you for considering this.
I have a question. Are there reports, either environmental impact study or wetland reports that you guys have obtained?
Yes, so our ecologist has written up both a wildlife report and wetlands report, and the data that you saw in our application and you hear us speak to today is extracted from them, but there are documents associated with that. And so there's also other processes, as you can imagine, we're going to go through. And so we've submitted those to the town, and they're open for public record. They are part of the planning process that are part of the development application. And so your staff members all have that. And what has happened is we've extracted the more specific content, as these are very robust documents that relate to your purview today, but they're available to the public.
Okay. Unfortunately, we were not privy to that information. So I don't see how we can make an informed decision today based on that lack of information.
Okay, yeah, I will encourage you guys to deliberate. We have this information, and perhaps one of the planning staff members can speak to information that is required for the application, because we did collaborate with your staff with the submittal, but I understand your perspective and still believe that what's been provided today, you know, is a version of proof that shares that the proposal will not impact the wetlands.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in that line of thinking, we don't really need to know whether or not there's an evacuation route.
Yeah.
What we need to know is what impact is the wetlands having by doing any kind of work within the setback that's been established in our development code. So we were not provided all the information, whether that was your responsibility or the town staff's responsibility. We did not have that information.
Okay, sorry about that. And then the accessory information about evacuation and what have you, hopefully paints a picture of the total project and also some of the reasoning for construction in certain areas. I would love it if perhaps the planning staff helped address that specific question. I completely understand what you're saying, Chairperson.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may provide some more background on your question there. The application materials provided to you do include a letter from the ecologist that summarizes their findings and includes the best management practices. So the full report was not included. However, the letter summarizing those findings are in the packet.
Okay. Is there anything you guys would like to discuss? Deliberate on?
Should we be hearing the discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if the discussion between the board members should be public, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we were discussing whether we felt we had enough information for what we were provided, and we don't think that we have been provided enough information to make an informed decision. So our discussion, our deliberation was about continuance of this matter until a further date as well, that we can get the reports in their entirety. So that's it.
Formal motion?
Yeah, I can do it, or you can do it.
All right. I'd like to make a motion.
Hang on a minute.
Do you mind if I ask a couple clarifying questions?
Go ahead.
If we could make it very clear what reports you are looking for
Anything,
in the motion. It doesn't have to be right now, but in the
Right.
motion, if you could make it very clear. And then I also want to make it clear and collaborate with staff whether those reports have already been submitted and if there's any additional action on our part.
okay. Good with that, so it's gonna be things like, wildlife or environmental impact and wetlands, reports is what we're looking for, which is really just all associated to a variance, within the setback of the wetlands, right? Doesn't really matter about the other things that were brought up because that's not what we're trying to give a variance for, right?
I move that the Board of Adjustment continue the variance request to the next regularly scheduled meeting, finding that we were not furnished full reports on the wildlife study, the wetland study, and we will communicate with staff on what reports we would like for the next meeting.
I'd second that motion. Can I have your vote, please? So shouldn't we have been voting against the variance application? Or we're voting for continuance?
Mr. Chair,
Okay,
you're voting
then
to
I'd like to
continue.
resubmit my vote.
I was voting for to continue.
Okay. Can we vote again, please? The continuance passed unanimously. I would like to say one thing to the audience, not that you have to stay and listen, but regardless of whether we give them a variance or not, they are going to build something there. They are going to build something, the town is gonna build something there regardless of whether we give them a variance or not. My personal opinion is that what they have come up with is probably the most aesthetically pleasing to the area. You know, the project Stover, I can't even remember the name of it, but they completed, I think, last year on Highway 7. They could be something like that or larger instead of something smaller like they're proposing. So I just kind of wanted to make that clear to everybody that just because we deny them their variance, as somebody with some development experience, they're going to build something anyway. So if they don't need to have a variance, they're going to build it within their right of whatever the zoning is for that area. That's it. Next item. Setback variance for 448 Chiquita Lane, Planner Washam. Reduce the north side of the setback from 25 feet to 17 feet for an detached garage.
We can give just a few minutes for folks to clear out before we start. the
No
next
problem. We're going to have a 5-minute recess break for necessities. Hope so. Are we ready? No, we're waiting for Kara. Okay, we'll wait for Karen.
Okay, good morning. I have just one, hopefully, a little easier item for you all. It's the variance request for setback at 448 Chiquita Lane. The applicants are Martin and Pamela Beckenstedt. They're not with us today, but the consultants are with us. The applicants request approval of a variance to reduce the site setback along the north property line from the required 25 feet to 17 feet to allow the construction of a detached garage. The subject property is Lot 139 and Lot 140 of the Alfresco Place subdivision. The property includes one single-family residence constructed in 1954. The property has an existing attached two-car garage. The property is 0.69 acres and is legally non-conforming. It is smaller than the 1 acre minimum. The property is located at 458 Chiquita Lane, approximately 400 feet northeast of West Winterview Avenue. The subject property and all adjacent properties are zoned E1 estate and are residential in use and low density. The applicants request approval of a variance to reduce the side setback along the north property line to 17 feet. The E1 estate zoning district requires 25-foot setbacks for the front, rear, and side property lines. The applicants request a variance to construct a 14-foot by 40-foot detached garage. This photo facing east shows the existing driveway. The orange line on the driveway represents the property line. As you can see from the photo, a portion of the driveway encroaches into the neighboring property on the north side. An access easement was granted in 1986 for this encroachment. This photo, also facing east, shows an existing shed that would be removed if the applicants are able to move forward with the proposed detached garage. The garage would be in line with where the shed is now. Here's the enlarged site plan. I marked it up to make it a little easier to see. The red structures are existing. The blue kind of shaded structures, the proposed attached garage. I highlighted in yellow around the existing pavement for the driveway. And then that green line going across is the property line. Here's a full site plan. I rotated it so it fits a little bit better, but north is up on this one. And then you can see sort of in the middle of the property, there's a line that dissects it between lot 140 and lot 139. Okay, moving on to the review criteria for the variance. Special conditions exist due to the orientation of the existing structures on the north lot and the location of the existing driveway. Development of an accessory use cannot occur on the southern lot because the principal use has not been established. In addition, water and sewer lines cross through the southern lot, greatly limiting the buildable area. This map shows the existing utility lines. Water service is shown in blue and sewer service is in green. In determining practical difficulty, the Board of Adjustment shall consider the following factors. Review criteria 2A. The residential use of the property is beneficial to the applicants. However, a detached garage is desired. Review criteria 2B. The variance request is substantial. Review criteria 2C. The proposed setback aligns with the neighborhood's existing development patterns. Many nearby structures already have similar lot line proximity, so this variance will not substantially change the neighborhood's essential character. This aerial image shows a relation between the existing structures and setbacks. Many appear to be substantially less than the prescribed 25 feet. Review criteria 2D. The variance would not adversely affect the delivery of public services, such as water and sewer. The application was referred to all applicable review agencies for comment. No objections or concerns were received. And 2E, applicants purchased the property in 2012 and had plans for expanding their garage space. They were unaware that their property line crossed their existing driveway. This discovery significantly limited the buildable area. Review criteria 2F, whether the applicant's predicament can be mitigated through some method other than a variance. At the pre-application meeting for the variance request, staff suggested amending the plat to dissolve the lot line between lots 139 and 140. In other words, merging the two lots into one. This process would eliminate associated setbacks and create a new buildable area south of the existing residence. However, this location is not ideal because the applicants wish to preserve the existing trees, which would be at risk from excavation. Other potential locations, such as southeast of the existing residence, would necessitate extending the driveway. I'll skip review criteria 3 to 5 since they are not applicable. Review criteria 6, if authorized, a variance shall represent the least deviation from the regulations that will afford relief. The proposed structure is approximately 4 feet from the existing residence and just over 25 feet from the rear property line. The garage could be designed smaller, however, it is a placement of the garage to align with the existing driveway that causes the setback encroachment and necessitates the variance request. Review criteria 7 pertains to whether the proposed use is permitted by right. The applicants request a setback variance to construct a detached garage. This is an accessory use permitted by right in the E1 estate zoning district. And then one final item under review criteria. The Board of Adjustment may choose to impose conditions when approving a variance. Staff has no recommendation for conditions of approval. The general notice provisions outlined in section 3.15 of the Estes Park Development Code were followed. At the time of this presentation, a few letters of public comment have been received and expressed opposition to the variance request. These comments are part of the packet and have been made available on the website. Staff recommends approval of the proposed variance described in the staff report with a side setback consistent with the site plan. If approved, the variance would allow the applicants to construct a detached garage. There are no known disadvantages. Here are a few sample motions for you all. That concludes my presentation. and the consultants are here as well to answer any questions.
You guys have any questions?
I did have a quick question on alternate locations for the garage. Towards the south wall of the house, it looked like it would be possible to place the garage there with maybe only disturbing one tree.
Next slide, please, Karen. Next slide.
Yeah. Let's see, yeah. Yeah, connecting to the southern portion of the horseshoe-shaped driveway, running along to the tree in the center of the southern plot, or southern lot. Can anyone speak to the potential of that location?
So right now, they would not be permitted to build a garage on that lot because it's an accessory structure, so a principal structure has to exist first. So if it had a home on that lot, they could do that. So unless the lot was amended and combined into one lot, they wouldn't be able to build anything like that on that,
Okay.
that second lot.
But a plat amendment would remedy that.
That's correct, it would. However, some of the concerns, the existing landscaping where those trees are, those would have to be removed. The applicants wish to avoid that. And also, if you notice on the utility maps, we have water lines and sewer lines running through that. I believe the code requires at least a minimum of 10-foot setback for development where there are utility lines. And so it's potentially, those would have to be relocated as well.
Could you show that again? The sewer map or utility map?
Yeah, because I did notice the service lines do run pretty directly southeast from the south end of the property, but not sure if there is the 10-foot setback needed.
So the existing property line, if you look at the left where you see a water line, there's a little orange dot. That's a water meter, I believe. The line is just north of that, and then it kind of cuts off a chunk of the southwest corner of the house and then connects a little bit above where that little point is. I wish I had that shown on there, but that's approximately where that line is, the lot line.
Okay, that makes more sense now, seeing the water lines. Yeah, that's all the questions I had.
Anything? Okay. I'm all good. Applicant or applicant's representative want to speak?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Lonnie Sheldon with Van Horn Engineering. This is Andy Schaffner with Van Horn Engineering. Andy did all the work. He's done all the drafting and the surveying for this project and can answer your questions better than I can. One additional point on the placement of the garage to the south is that the existing garage is to the north. And so if you had a house where your front door and your garage door, and then you got another garage door on the other side of the house, it just would be, it'd wreck my world. But anyway, I wanted to make that one additional point. Let me start by saying that we started this process in June and July of this year. And I know Mr. Robertson, the neighbor, and pardon me, Mr. Shaw, and we knew that we were going to have neighborhood communications, and so we started with that, and we met with them, and we've done a pretty thorough job of trying to communicate with the neighbors to win them over to where they would be supportive of the variance, and that hasn't happened, and so we decided in August, let's just go to the board and let's get it done and get a decision made and go from there. We had offered the neighbors a site plan, and they wanted us to come back with a written agreement. We produced a written agreement. They came back with additional conditions. We felt like the additional conditions were not very realistic. And so the owners got tired of batting the ball back and forth, and they said, let's go get a decision made. And so we did that. Andy prepared a PowerPoint that outlines the process with the neighbors. That might not be interesting to you, but we have it. So if you want to see it after listening to the neighbors, we can put it up and it'll help organize the process that we went through. But we'll hold on to that unless you want to see it. Okay. The proposed garage design has been changed several times in the past, over the life of this process. We had it attached, then we had it detached, then we moved it south and east, and we've tried to get it as far from that north line as we can. Andy has a point to make that when you drive a vehicle into that garage, we've already tucked the garage slightly behind the north edge of the garage, but you can still get in the door. But that bevel on the garage is intentional to increase the setback to the north. Yeah. We would like to, address the written, comments from the neighbors here. We received copies of those letters, Friday of last week. I'm gonna let Andy talk about a few things here, and then we'd like to reserve the right to come back and, of course, rebut any neighborhood comments.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, so as was already mentioned, we have a horseshoe lot and we're trying to squeeze in a garage at that north end. So our initial plan, actually, we were going to have the garage only 10 feet away from the property line, which we've discussed with the neighbors. At the end, once we could not come to an agreement, we decided to maximize how far we could keep the garage from the north property line and then keep it completely out of the rear setback right there. So yep, we did this by leaving just enough foot for a 9-foot door right in front of the garage and minimizing space between for that little walking path in between. So the purpose for this, one of the purposes for this variance is our client has complained that their truck does not fit in the garage as it exists, and that they also have a camper that they're trying to store, and otherwise the camper will otherwise be stored on the property without the garage. So trying to minimize impact to the neighborhood. So I'm sure when the neighbor will have some opinions on the 1986 easement shown across 458 Chiquita. It is, if you see the portion of the driveway north of the property line, there's an easement. I have a copy of that easement. There's some question, the neighbors have had some question about whether we can use that easement can be used, and on that regard, I guess we'll wait for them to say why they believe they cannot, and we'll rebut. Yep. I believe now Lonnie has a letter from the owner that he would like to read.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know you all got the letter from the Bokenstadts. If you've read it, I don't need to bore you with reading it again. We'll just let the public comment happen.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question.
Sure.
Has any thought been given to aligning this garage with the parallel to the eastern setback?
We could kick the upper end of the garage there to the left and maintain the same 17-foot setback. So I guess yes, if we wanted to do that, I don't know that we'd have to get a new ruling from the board, because you're going to give us, ideally, you'll give us a 17.1 foot from the north, north is left on that drawing.
Yeah, it's cockeyed.
Yeah.
Basically rotating the building clockwise as we see it.
Counter?
My comment on that is based on, can you then get this out of the setback completely?
Oh, you're talking about rotating it clockwise. You are saying clockwise. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Based on, you can see where the 25-foot setback is right up there. If you were to project 10 feet, you would not have room for a door.
You'd have to rotate that building 80 degrees or something, I think, and then you'd be coming out.
Then you'd be moving it south.
Yeah, and you'd be coming out in line with the door. You'd be coming out more in line with the neighbor, rather than pointing toward the road, headlights, and impact that way.
Just
But yeah, it's a
asking.
fair question. Yeah.
Right, because you have legal use of that driveway, yes?
Yeah, the 1986 easement is valid.
The 497 is an encroachment that we have not found an easement for, however. So if you notice, there's a property corner on the north property line. That gray line divides 458 and 497. The portion on 497 we have not found an easement for.
Okay. All right. So it could be non-conforming to begin with. All right, that was just a question.
Okay.
Anybody in the audience want to make a comment?
Yes, I'd like to.
State your name and address, please.
My name is Blake Robertson. My wife Susan is also here. We live at 471 McGregor Avenue. We also own 497 McGregor Avenue. I'd like to give you some renderings. My wife and I are opposed to this variance. It's been a long process, as Lonnie has stated. They started back in 2025 with a 10-foot request, and we wanted various, we'll say, concessions. Denny and Robin Shaw aren't here today. They're at 458 Chiquita. They're on their way back. They were on vacation. I did send them a copy of the variance notice. They hope to be back for today, but they may not make it. I would like to address some of their concerns, and they pertain to the driveway. If I could have them bring up one of your slides. The one that shows the orange line.
The colored.
Colored one? No, the orange, the driveway asphalt.
Oh, yes, that back one, Karen, the photo. The photo,
Photo.
looking north, next
Yeah.
one over.
Oh, another one, yes. Okay. On this picture here, you see an orange line going to a green line. The orange line is where the easement document exists. And in talking to Denny, and I haven't read the easement document, but in it, it talks about non-commercial use of the easement and the property. Until recently, we'll call it the Yellow House, was used as a VRBO, which is a commercial enterprise. And I believe the Shawls have a concern with the validity of the easement because it was used as a commercial property. I'll leave that up to them to discuss. The green line is the results of Lonnie Sheldon's work at finding a corner point for the 497 McGregor property. As I brought out in my responses, the 497 property used to be a cabin that sat on 8 acres, which were divided in 1950-ish, and half of that went to where the Yellow House is, and the other half went to, I believe it was a Mr. Groover. So the cabin was historic in nature. It actually pre-existed possibly the plotting of Alfresco Place. I believe it was built by one of the project engineers for the Stanley Hotel. It didn't show up on the tax records until 1912 because the Larimer County sent around people to find these undocumented structures in Estes Park, and they found the cabin. The cabin, I believe, was built by somebody not local because it was built on 21 concrete piers, which is abnormal for here. I have remodeled it. It is now used as a vacation rental. It has a permit number 3010. And as you can see from my picture that I supplied to you, that garage, and that represents a 40-foot long garage, it was placed on the picture between the survey points, so it represents their survey sticks. There's nothing said as to the height of the garage. It could be as high as 31 feet. This would be a huge visual impact to that cabin. Also, my property is to the due east of that, and it would be an impact for us also to have a 31-foot high potential peak to a garage. Those are the reasons that I'm opposing it, is for the visual impacts. I don't believe it's necessary. I went through a minor property boundary change that the town called as one of the items of why they should have this variance. And I pointed out that it was due to a surveying error done in '55, and we came to an agreement to change the boundary line to give a maintenance area behind the cabin. So it doesn't really conform to the needs of this variance request as an objection. Okay. I'm sorry that the Shawls aren't here to speak for themselves. I would request for both of us that you deny the variance. We did try when they had the 10-foot variance. My response was, you put trees along the side of your garage, and I'll go for it. I will not oppose it. They said that was irresponsible request. Susan, would you like to say something?
Susan Robertson, 471 McGregor Avenue. You know, people move into their homes and then they decide to make changes. But why? Why don't we then go and look at what will be the impact to your neighbors visually? Why not go down the hill, look up, walk around, and try to figure out how it can be a win-win? That's what I'm asking for. Because it's unfortunate that we see other areas too where large buildings are now built and they're very tall. And, you know, we've lived there quite a few years now. Bought it almost 30 years ago, retired there 16 years ago. We don't know these people. I have had no interaction with these people, but they certainly could come down the hill and look up, because it is on a slope, and look and see, you know, what kind of impact would it be to us. I wish them best, but I definitely wish that it was a two-way street. And I thank you very much, and I don't know what else to say, but thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience want to say anything? If you want to step back up, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, thank you. We were contemplating your comment, Jeff, about rotating the garage in the back there, and the easement stops short. It would be a narrow chute to get a vehicle through there to make that turn, and it's a pull behind bumper pull camper, and my wife can't fit the garage with a regular car. I have an issue at home with that's a funny thing, but to put a camper in a garage on a skew like that would be a pretty good chore, I think.
I'm not saying it isn't.
Yeah.
Hang on just a minute. Could we see the site plan that Kara marked up with different colors?
Yeah.
That one. Thank you. So, tell me, Lonnie, where,
see where it says
in relation to this, I saw the picture. I was on the site with the orange and the green paint, and that was helpful. Where does it end? Where does the driveway easement end?
Yeah, that circle on the north line, on the green line, that says plastic cap PLS.
Oh, gotcha.
That's where the east end of the easement on the neighboring property ends.
Yeah, it would be difficult.
So you'd have to come in the driveway and then fit the gap and then make the bend if the garage were rotated more.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm all about turning radiuses.
And the way my dad did that as a kid. He put a trailer hitch on the front of his truck. And you could maneuver like crazy like that, but when you're backing in, you can't.
Well, like with a semi.
Yeah, there you go.
Something with a fifth wheel, you can move them much
Yeah.
easier than a bumper tow. I have one on my truck too. I was just curious. I mean, it's the same sort of comment that I made before. If we don't give someone a variance and there is an alternative and it is conforming to their, to the development code zoning regulations, then you're just gonna do it anyway.
Gonna get a garage anyway, yeah. Yeah, anyway, for us to conclude, we did try with the neighbors. We worked on that pretty good and we do have those details if you want to see them. It got deeper than
Planting trees.
Yeah, it was a lot of back and
One
forth.
warranty for the tree's life over 5 years and other.
But anyway, these lots are substandard for the zoning district.
Oh, yeah.
It's only 7/10 of an acre with 2 parcels. If you look at the half-acre zoning, it's a 10-foot side setback. We wouldn't be here. And that's our non-conforming argument. We all can agree the existing conditions are not a result or an action of the applicant. The applicant bought it in 2012. That's what they purchased. They didn't build it that way. We can all agree it is not an extreme or unusual request and not uncommon for older neighborhoods in Estes Park. We appreciate the Board of Adjustment's authority and being able to grant this variance to help overcome these hardships. And we ask for your approval of this variance today.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Would you like to make another comment?
Thank you for another opportunity. Andy mentioned that there were the trees and that he sort of said under his breath a 5-year commitment. There were 2 options on the trees. One was to put in trees that were mature, 8 feet to 12 feet, and no commitment, or put in smaller trees and a 5-year commitment to their survival. Both of those were considered irresponsible requests. Yes, these are older neighborhoods. They have strange lots. One might blame the town for allowing strange lots to be built. And for purchasing these, one has to do their due diligence. And Lonnie may not remember this conversation. I was pointing out to him when he was doing the survey to find that corner point on 497 that there was a gentleman that came around to survey the 448 property, and all he did was hit the points and write down that they existed. So he couldn't verify this corner point on the west corner of 497 because it was covered by asphalt. So they obtained a survey that was possibly less complete because it cost less. If we ask Lonnie how much I've paid to have survey work done, it's substantial. And I chose to do substantial work to know where my boundaries were.
It's always a good idea.
Yes, and to now complain that, oh, I didn't know, I think flies in the face of being a diligent person and doing your proper work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Is there anything you'd like to talk about? Go ahead.
I'm struggling with, we're here to talk about a variance. And excuse me, I don't know how far down the road we go about the easements. They seem to be 2 different things. Are we going to talk about 17-foot setback, or are we going to talk about the validity of easements and how that one is possibly legal and the other one easement, we don't even know if it exists? So how far down the road do we go with this?
I'm not sure that that has anything to do with the variance that we are talking
It's
about.
exactly where I'm coming from.
right.
And Are we
In my
talking about the
opinion-
variance or are we talking about the easements?
In my
If I can
appearance-
provide a little bit of clarity on that. So the access easement, the town doesn't have a legal interest in that. It's not ran through the town. That's through property owners recorded with Larimer County. So if there's any disagreement with that, that would be a civil matter. The town wouldn't be involved.
I mean, we don't have the town attorney here, but I have some experience with this that I don't think that it's really a valid talking point for the variance before us.
Which is where I was coming, that's where my question is coming from.
But one question on that matter though. If the easement is dissolved, is this proposed location for the garage, I mean, are you able to get the camper into there still? Is that even valid? Okay, then that answers that question.
We've done turning templates, yes.
Okay, then I'm good on that.
Come here to give the answer, please. Stand up. We don't need to see it. I just need you to come to the microphone.
So we do have a turning template. It is undeniably tight. If we were designing this new, we probably would. And also if, let's say the variance is approved today, and in the future, we decide that it is that, and then later legal decisions or whatever course of action it takes, decide the easement is invalid, we most likely would then come back and put asphalt on land Mr. Bogenstat does own in order to facilitate turning in and out of that garage.
Very well.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Either one of you would like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. I move to approve the variance request to reduce the side setback to 17 feet along the north property line for the subject property addressed as 448 Chiquita Lane in Estes Park.
Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Can I get your vote, please? Pass unanimously. We have any reports or discussion items?
No, sir, none today.
Okay. We're all good? Meeting's adjourned.